I knocked 3 times, the heavy oak door echoing like thunder against the silence of the cul-de-sac. The air was thick hot despite the lateness of the hour and still, as if even the wind dared not stir. James Sullivan opened the door with the kind of face that hadn't known sleep in weeks. His eyes were bloodshot, pupils sharp with the edge of desperation. His shirt was crumpled and stained, hands trembling slightly as they gripped the handle. "Thank you for coming, Father," he said, barely above a whisper. "Can I take your coat?" "No, that's fine," I replied calmly, stepping inside. "I won't be long." He led me through the narrow hallway, each step groaning beneath our feet. The walls were once white, but now tinged with yellow, like they had absorbed years of cigarette smoke and whispered arguments. I could feel something in the air, not just tension, something off. "April," James said, as we entered the back bedroom. "Father Martin is here. He's going to help us." She was sitting in an old rocking chair, motionless except for the mechanical sway of the chair beneath her. Her face was a ghost's, drained, hollow, wide-eyed, staring at nothing and everything all at once. Her fingers trembled where they clutched the ends of the armrests, her mouth barely parted but silent, and in front of her, on a small red rug with frayed edges, was the child. He looked like any other child at first glance. Brown curls, soft cheeks, small frame. But even as I knelt to get closer, I noticed his fingers moving too quickly, his eyes flicking from side to side unnaturally fast. He was playing with wooden blocks, though not building towers or castles as boys his age should. No, he was carefully arranging them to spell out combinations of letters that didn't belong in any human language. CWTHYN, Zawin, Enshalu. I murmured, my brows furrowed. "When did you notice the changes?" I asked, still kneeling. James shifted on his feet, eyes flicking from his wife to the boy, then back to me. "It started a month ago. I worked the docks, late hours. That day, April went to get some butter. She swears she was gone only 30 minutes. But when she came back, he was already gone." April interrupted, her voice dry, barely a whisper. "I beg your pardon." I looked to her. "The Fae took him," she said again, louder this time. "The fairy's father. They took Connor and left that thing." April hadn't moved from the rocking chair, but her eyes now met mine. They shimmered with something between madness and clarity, as if some part of her, deep inside, still clung to the truth. James sat on the edge of the bed, his elbows on his knees. His hands were clasped tightly, whitening at the knuckles. "I didn't believe it at first," he said. "I thought April was just shaken up. You know, postpartum stuff, stress. But after a few days, I started to see it too." The boy looked up at me, just for a second. His eyes were wide and dark to dark, almost entirely pupil. No smile, no curiosity, just observation. It was like looking into the eyes of a predator pretending to be prey. "His appetite," James continued, "it's monstrous. He eats like 3 grown men. We can barely afford groceries anymore. He'll scream if we don't feed him, not cry scream like a wild animal." April nodded slowly. "And he doesn't sleep. He just lies in bed, staring at the ceiling. Sometimes I find him on the floor, curled up in the corner like a dog." I studied the boy again. He had gone back to the blocks, arranging them carefully in a new formation. His hands moved in precise, unnatural patterns, almost musical in their rhythm. "He doesn't speak anymore?" I asked. April finally let out a hollow laugh, short and bitter. "He never speaks. Just those ... noises, grunts, clicks. I tried playing his favorite cartoons. Nothing. Not even SpongeBob makes him laugh anymore." James rubbed his face with both hands. "At night, we hear things. Scratching in the walls. Voices outside the window. The dog ran off last week. Just took off down the street and never came back. He used to love Connor." April looked up suddenly. "He used to say Mummy every morning. He hasn't said it once in 30 days. I stood and turned toward the child again. He hadn't stopped arranging the blocks. The newest word now read, "All hell vexth." "I assume you've searched the house?" I asked James. "Top to bottom," he said. "I even had pest control come check the attic. They found nothing." April's voice turned brittle. "We tried taking him to a doctor, but he wouldn't go. Screamed and screamed until the receptionist called security. We had to drag him back to the car." He bit James on the hand. James held up his wrist to show a faint scar. It looked weeks old, but deep. "And that's when I remembered something my grandmother used to say. April whispered. About the fae. About changelings. I thought it was nonsense. Fairy tales. But now, the air in the room seemed heavier. A silence settled between us, not the peaceful kind, but the kind that suffocates. I turned to James, choosing my words with caution. If what you say is true, then yes, this may be a changeling. There are signs, the appetite, the silence, the odd behaviors, and if it is a changeling, there are ways to get your child back. April snapped her gaze toward me with such hope that it nearly broke me. What do we do? The Sullivan house had grown still, yet the silence was unnatural, oppressive, the kind of quiet that suggested listening. Watching. James stood, nerves unraveling, pacing the room. April remained in the rocking chair, eyes flicking from me too. The boy, I could feel their hope clinging to me like a weight. You said there are ways, James finally asked, to get our real son back. What are they? I lowered my voice. Changelings are afraid of two things, fire and water. They are not like us. They mimic flesh, but their spirit recoils from purity. James frowned. So what do we do? You, take him to the river, I said plainly. Hold him under. Do not let him up until you feel it shift. April gasped, her face draining of what little color remained. James, on the other hand, took a step forward. Are you saying drown him? No, I said. You're not drowning a child. You're forcing a creature to give up its mask. If it is a changeling, and I truly believe it is, then the fire will return your real boy, rather than see their creation harmed. And if he is just a disturbed child? April asked, voice cracking. I looked directly at her, slowly, letting silence fill the space between us. I've seen this before. Once, years ago, in a parish outside Belfast. They hesitated, waited too long. By the time the creature returned, the real boy, there wasn't enough left to save. April turned away, covering her mouth with shaking hands. James looked at his son. No, the thing pretending to be his son. The creature didn't react. It had stopped building with the blocks and was now sitting unnaturally still, its head tilted, just slightly to the left, lips curled ever so slightly, like it was listening, like it understood. James looked back at me. And this will bring him back. Our real Connor, if you're strong enough to finish it. The Fae only trade when they must. Don't give them the option of waiting you out. He looked again to April. Her shoulders rose and fell once, barely a nod. I turned to leave, but stopped in the hall. Do not hesitate. James, if you want your son back, you'll do what must be done. I walked out into the fading twilight. The cicadas screamed like banshees in the trees. The air was thick, swampy, the way it gets when rain has been threatening for days but never comes. I took a deep breath, letting the illusion fall away. Idiots, gullible, frightened, pathetic fools. The boy wasn't a changeling. He was just ... different perhaps, autistic, perhaps traumatized, perhaps simply not what his parents expected. But these backwater yokels couldn't comprehend that, so they latched onto fairy tales and folklore. And now, if I played this right, they'd drown the boy, an innocent child, in cold water, with their own hands. And the best part, they would do it believing it was salvation. They wouldn't even hide the body. And when the authorities arrived, when the questions began, when the noose tightened, I'd be long gone. Clean hands, clean conscience. Because God didn't make monsters, people did. The next morning, the sun rose pale and unsure, veiled behind a smear of grey clouds. The town was silent, as if it sensed what was coming. Even the birds seemed to withhold their songs. James woke first. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the floor in the dark, his hands resting on his knees. He didn't move, not even when April stirred beside him. Her breathing was shallow, her fingers curled into fists around the bedsheet. Today, he said, quietly. We do it today. April didn't answer. She rose and dressed without a word. In the living room, the changeling was already awake, sitting in the same spot on the rug. No blocks this time, just sitting, watching. Its face was blank, but James felt that it knew. He didn't speak to it, just picked it up gingerly, like a doll, and wrapped it in a towel. April opened the door. The air outside was crisp and damp. The morning fog still hovered low across the lawn, curling around their feet like smoke. They didn't say a word, just walked. James holding the child, April beside him, pale and stiff as stone. The path to the river was narrow and winding, surrounded by tall grasses and black trees that seemed to lean in close. The walk was long, too long. Every step weighed on their hearts. Each turn of the trail brought more doubt, more dread, but neither stopped. When they reached the riverbank, the fog had thickened. The water was dark and slow-moving, a mirror to the overcast sky. Not a single ripple disturbed its surface. James stepped toward the edge. His shoes sank into the soft mud. April followed closely, trembling. The boy squirmed slightly in his arms, but made no sound. James stared at the water for what felt like hours. Then he turned to April. "Are you sure?" he asked. She didn't respond at first. Her eyes were locked on the bundle in his arms. Then, with a breath so shallow it was almost silence, she said, "Do it." James stepped into the river. The cold bit into his legs, crawling up through his pants like ice. He moved until the water reached his waist. Then he lowered the boy at first. It resisted, little arms pressing against his shoulders, but when its face hit the water its mouth opened in a scream. Only it wasn't a scream, it was a screech, high-pitched, otherworldly, like metal scraping against bone. The air split with it, birds erupting from the trees. The water churned violently. James held on. The child flailed, clawed, kicked. Its eyes rolled back, limbs spasming unnaturally. But James did not let go. "Bring him back," he shouted into the wind. "You bastards, bring my son back." April stood at the shore, tears streaming down her cheeks, hands over her mouth. And then the water stopped churning. The body went still. James, breathing hard, pulled the boy from the river. It was no longer the Change, it was Connor, pale, weak, but real. The face was his, the eyes were his. He opened them and looked at James, confused and afraid. "Daddy," he whispered. James collapsed into the water, sobbing. April rushed in, wrapping her arms around them both. The nightmare was over. Or so they thought. The Sullivan home was filled with warmth for the first time in weeks. Connor was back. He was quieter than before. Fragile, he flinched when the wind tapped the windows and stared at his own hands, as if trying to remember how they worked. But he was eating normally, sleeping peacefully, and most importantly he spoke. "Mummy," he had whispered that night as April tucked him in, and she'd broken into sobs, cradling his little face in her hands. James didn't leave his side for 2 full days. He kept watch like a sentry, sleeping in a chair at the foot of the bed, whispering prayers into the dark. The priest, Father Martin, was never heard from again. No follow-up, no check-in, just a quiet disappearance, as if he'd never been there to begin with. Weeks passed. Connor began to draw again. Strange things, yes, but they were just crayon shapes, children's scribbles. April kept them all, even the odd ones, especially the one he drew of a woman with no eyes and limbs, too long for her body. "She sang to me," he had said. One night, James found Connor standing at the window, staring into the woods. "Everything okay, buddy?" Connor turned slowly. "The fog people miss me." James froze. "What people?" "The fog people. But it's okay. They can't come in the house anymore." He smiled, and for the first time, James saw something behind that smile that he couldn't name. But it passed. Connor went to bed, slept like a stone. Another week went by. And then came the knock. 3 sharp raps on the door. James opened it, expecting maybe a neighbor. It was a man in a dark coat. Not Father Martin, not anyone he knew. "Mr. Sullivan?" the man asked. "Yes, I'm here on behalf of the diocese. We've had some irregularities with Father Martin. Reports, actually." "Reports?" "Yes. He said he visited you about a changeling situation, that he gave you instructions." James nodded, his chest tightening. "He helped us. He saved our boy." The man shook his head, gently but firmly. "Sir, Father Martin wasn't a priest. He was excommunicated 5 years ago for dangerous doctrine, fringe practices. He was last seen near your town, but we've lost track." James stepped back from the door, blood draining from his face. "What do you mean he wasn't a priest?" The man handed over a file, photos, documents, even a newspaper clipping. "Local priest suspected in multiple child deaths disappears before trial. He targeted vulnerable families, exploited folklore, convinced them their children weren't really theirs. The consequences were," he looked down, choosing his words, "severe." James's head swam, his knees nearly buckled. "But Connor, he came back. It worked. He's fine." The man looked at him, solemn. Did it work? Or did something else come in when the door was opened? James ran upstairs. He burst into Connor's room. Empty. just the crayon drawings on the wall, now darker, more detailed. One of them showed a family standing by the river. Another showed Connor but older, taller, his eyes entirely black, smiling. In the center of the wall, one word, scrawled in red crayon: "Thank you." Asterisk. They thought they had saved their son, but in their desperation, they invited something far worse. What do you think happened that night at the river? Was it really Connor who returned? Or did the five finally get what they wanted? Let us know your theories in the comments. And if you enjoy chilling true crime, paranormal mysteries, and twisted horror tales, subscribe to Shadow Case File. Where every case leaves a shadow behind.